Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you break free from chronic inflammation and get your life back. I'm Dr. Rachel Yeager, naturopathic doctor and medical intuitive, and the founder of the Surviving to Thriving method of chronic illness recovery. Join me as we uncover strategies for overcoming health challenges and restoring your physical, mental, emotional, and soul health. Together, let's embark on a journey to thriving. So there's a big connection between fast heart rate and low blood pressure and histamine symptoms. So I want to talk about this connection between POTS symptoms and histamine. A lot of people actually have POTS or POTS-like symptoms and they just don't know they have it because it's just not talked about often enough outside of this kind of niche, but it is really common. So let's talk about POTS first, because you may have POTS without realizing it. So POTS causes a fast heart rate with very little exertion. Your heart rate might kick up to the level it would if you were running, just from you walking to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Or you could be lying down on the couch just reading and your heart rate is 100. This is called tachycardia. It's a medical term for fast heart rate. And sometimes there are improper beats and palpitations that can happen on top of that. POTS also causes low blood pressure. Low blood pressure is a sneaky way to make someone feel exhausted all the time. It also creates this sense of anxiety or just uneasiness, kind of a doom feeling. It's this feeling of something really isn't right. And it's because your blood pressure is so low, your body is struggling to get blood to your brain, and you're feeling that kind of instinctive panic response like, why am I not getting enough blood right now? Other symptoms can include really cold fingers and toes. Sometimes people are more likely to have Raynaud's if they have POTS because of what's happening with the blood vessel dilation, which we'll talk about. And so, with this low blood pressure, the blood pools in your legs can give your legs a purplish, mottled, lacy spiderweb like appearance. This happens due to blood pooling and because of the inflammatory response in the body that happens with histamine, which causes POTS, which we'll talk about. So, for diagnosing POTS, you can either get officially diagnosed by a cardiologist who specializes in POTS, and they'll do a tilt table test. It's an inversion test where they're flipping your position and then measuring your heart rate to rise and how much your blood pressure drops afterward. This test can make people really sick. It can make you feel pretty terrible. A lot of people hate that test and feel like it really upset their system, potentially for even months afterward. And the point of the test is to provoke your symptoms and observe what happens. So, because POTS is this positional dysregulation where your autonomic nervous system can't adequately regulate your blood pressure and you pulse when you change position, there's a whole spectrum of actually having POTS versus just being on the verge of having it. You're kind of borderline, or just having some of the symptoms. Only if you stand up really fast, you might feel it, or only if you are hiking uphill for a long time. So technically, the official POTS is diagnosed based on a certain amount of change in your heart rate and your blood pressure. But from a holistic perspective, a diagnosis isn't always actually necessary. A lot of people skip the tilt table test because, from a holistic perspective, where we're going after the root cause of POTS and not just medicating the symptom, it doesn't really matter whether you have an official diagnosis or not. If you're experiencing a fast heart rate with, just walking to the kitchen. And if you're getting blood pressure drops, it's often coming from the same root causes, whether you have an official diagnosis or not. The approach is usually the same. It's all about solving the root cause, not just following an algorithm. What I'm talking about mostly applies to the type of POTS that's acquired later in life from a non trauma cause. So, in my mind, there's kind of two classes of POTS. You can be born with POTS, and so it's a structural type of POTS, or you can have a structural type of POTS that's triggered by trauma. Both of those types would be the same class. They would be more that structural, not a functional cause, where this isn't something that we can just shift the body's physiology. This means the nerve was damaged in surgery. Maybe it was compressed, meaning pushed on. Maybe it was cut, maybe a car accident or something caused damage to the vagus nerve. So if the vagus nerve is damaged, either from birth or later from a traumatic event, then it can't control your heart rate and your blood pressure properly. The autonomic nervous system, which is supposed to work automatically, then struggles to regulate itself. The type that I most commonly see and work with is the more acquired type of POTS. So this comes later in life. This is due to an inflammatory response. The number one culprit, number one type of inflammation is histamine. Histamine is produced by your white blood cells in response to anything the body views as a threat. So, this could be infections, they can be parasitic, viral, bacterial, fungal, or environmental biotoxins like mold. Those are probably the most common causes that I see showing up. And the role of histamine in POTS. So, histamine is a vasodilator, meaning it expands your blood vessels. When your blood vessels expand, the same amount of blood is now filling a larger space, causing the blood to pool in your legs and reducing blood flow to your brain. So, this can worsen brain fog and fatigue for obvious reasons. You're not getting the blood flow to your brain. There are a lot of symptoms that are associated with high histamine or what's also called histamine intolerance. So, we can have brain fog, we can have alcohol intolerance, fatigue, especially after eating meals, flushing after a hot shower, and then skin issues, rashes, hives, or itching. There's the histamine test you could do on your skin, checking for dermatographia, where you draw your nail across your skin. And if it's still showing up, and if it really swells and turns red and stays as a line that's visible for a few minutes, that can be a pretty big indicator that you're having high histamine. So, targeting the root cause here is all about doing things in the correct order of events. So, before we even remove the trigger, we can start to stabilize the histamine response. A holistic approach usually involves stabilizing the mast cells. So, these are the cells that release histamine to make them less trigger happy, for lack of a better term. And we also want to support the liver, the kidneys, and the gut to help clear histamine from the body. We're never going to fully solve the issue if we don't remove the trigger. This doesn't mean we have to pick apart every single possible trigger that's going on in the body. But for most people, the trigger is something like mold exposure, undiagnosed infections, severe gut inflammation, or other biotoxins that can be similar to mold, sometimes heavy metals, sometimes different gases we can be exposed to. So, all of these need to be identified and eliminated. A trigger is not usually a food sensitivity. That is a reaction to you already having high histamine. And then we need to support the body. So we need to open detox pathways and we need to work gradually, starting from the bottom up with the most peripheral pathways before we go in and target the main issue directly. Common mistakes I see are over restrictive diets or blaming everything on food sensitivities. So, cutting out high histamine foods can really backfire. It just leads to increased sensitivities and further restriction because your body then starts responding with the same amount of histamine it's still producing because that wasn't the root cause. It was not your diet. So, it keeps producing the same amount of histamine that it was. And now it's reacting to the second tier of histamine evoking foods. And then once you cut those out, it reacts to the third tier. And then pretty soon you're just eating rice and you feel terrible, worse than before you started. And then it's really hard to add back in the foods. So this is not sustainable. I'm really not a fan of over restrictive diets. I've seen them really tank a lot of people's health. And then not doing proper supplementation or working with someone who's not specialized in this area, as well meaning as they might be, they're probably going to start with upstream supplements like glutathione or B12 or folate. They're going to go in and just start these big main moving pathways without checking and making sure that these downstream pathways are unplugged. It's like pouring water into the tub before making sure that the drain is open. You're just going to be creating an upstream clog that's really going to cause a lot of symptoms and not stabilizing histamine first. So if we don't stabilize our mast cells, and help stop this histamine production and lower the histamine, that can really worsen symptoms. With histamine, we want to take a multi level approach to really addressing all the parts of the histamine cascade that can be showing up. For most people, we do want to do every single level of that cascade. So, what that looks like is at the very top, there is stabilizing your histamine producing cells. So, stabilizing your white blood cells that are producing the histamine. These are your mast cells. That's the type of white blood cell that makes it. So, it's releasing this histamine. We don't want it to be so trigger happy and overreactive. We can use herbs and supplements to actually calm the overactive mast cells. We can also support the liver. So, the liver is processing the histamine. So, it's pulling it out of the bloodstream so you're not having all the effects of it. So making sure our liver function is really optimized and help the body clear excess histamine. A lot of people jump and do a liver supplement and they actually start pushing too much stuff into their bloodstream, or they're doing the wrong stuff, or they're choosing herbs that actually liberate histamine. So again, doing everything very carefully in this area is really important. Our kidneys have a natural enzyme called DAO, diamine oxidase, that actually breaks down. So it degrades and eats up histamine. So we can not only support kidney health, so we can get the best natural DAO, but a lot of people with histamine issues are genetically deficient in DAO, or even if you're not genetically deficient, we're using it all up to break down this high level of histamine. So we can supplement things like DAO to actually help ensure that the histamine is degrading down the way we want. We can also use antihistamines. So we can actually block the histamine receptors. Antihistamines prevent the histamine from binding to the receptors. So they reduce the symptoms like flushing and itching and brain fog. But histamine still circulates in the body just because it's not binding to the receptors that the antihistamines are blocking. So this isn't a complete solution. We're still having the inflammation from the histamine being there. And then we can also use binders. So these are things like activated charcoal and zeolite. There's plenty of others that help mop up histamine in the gut. So your liver is pulling this histamine out. It's putting it into the intestines so that you can eliminate it with a bowel movement. And then if you're either not going often enough, or if you just have so much that your body is having a chance to reabsorb what's passing through, then your intestines are going to do their job great and they're going to reabsorb the nutrients that are sitting in your intestines because they're trying to absorb nutrients from your food. One of those things that reabsorbs might be some of these histamine related toxins that are causing you to feel really poorly. So a binder acts as a mop. It's like Velcro. It has a really, for being so tiny, it actually has a very big surface area, the way that the chemical is structured that we're using for a binder. And so it actually mops up and grabs like Velcro these toxins so that we're not reabsorbing them and we can poop them out and they can be actually eliminated from the body instead of recirculating. So there's all these different steps. That's 5 different points to support the histamine cascade. And if we don't do all these 5, then we're missing a big part of the picture because every single one of these 5 is extremely important. And so again, a lot of people come in and they say, okay, your histamine is being caused by your leaky gut. Look at your GI map. You have stuff in your gut. Look at your food sensitivity test. We've got to work on your gut. Well, everything that they give you to help your gut, if they haven't stabilized the actual root cause, which is your histamine's high in the first place, because it's reacting to something else, then you're actually probably not going to tolerate that approach very well. You might get sicker. And then again, restricting things is usually not the way to go. Instead, we need to actually identify and address your specific root causes and check for what your immune system is actually responding to that's making it produce such high histamine, and then take the holistic approach of balancing everything out. Progesterone helps stabilize histamine levels, while estrogen can actually make symptoms worse. So, women with POTS might notice symptom fluctuations during their menstrual cycle. And then with nutrient levels, vitamins like different B vitamins and magnesium, they're all used for histamine processing. But again, we can't just come in with a big nutrient bomb. We have to carefully use the nutrients that open up the bottom pathways instead of accidentally giving nutrients that are going to run the upper pathways while we haven't made sure that all of our detox pathways are open. So there's a lot of things that play in: hormones, our cortisol levels, how much we're sleeping, how stressed we are, how our cell membranes are functioning. Are they nice and solid and sending all the chemical signals that they're supposed to be? Are all of our detox pathways open? All of this all feeds together. So it's really important to take a bird's eye view when it comes to histamine and POTS. And if you've been diagnosed later in life with POTS and it was not associated with trauma or anything structural, chances are you are missing a big part of the histamine picture. And, histamine can also include a bunch of other inflammatory mediators, like there's really leukotrienes, and our body produces heparin and a bunch of other stuff that's kind of all grouped under that histamine bucket. But to keep it simple, we say this is histamine intolerance if you're having POTS and if you're having these signs of high histamine. And we've got to figure out what your immune system is responding to, stabilize that histamine, start gently unblocking your pathways from the bottom up, and balance all the supporting areas like your hormones and your gut health and your stress so that your body can actually heal. I used to have POTS. It was really bad. I couldn't exercise at all. I just went on a 2-mile hike the other day. So, this kind of later in life POTS, I have seen it totally reverse in myself and many people I've worked with. Even if it got pretty severe, plenty of people with the right approach can actually reverse this. And plenty of people can reverse the symptoms of high histamine with the brain fog, the skin issues, the irritability, the memory issues, the flushing, fatigue, all of this that comes along with it. You can make big, big, big changes in your health in not too long of a time frame, as long as you are actually addressing things in the correct order, doing it in the right way, and doing it with someone who knows what they're looking for. You don't need a ton of labs to treat this stuff. You can actually treat this stuff without any labs at all if you're working with someone who knows what they're looking for and knows what symptoms to look for. So I hope this was helpful. I will see everyone in the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Surviving to Thriving podcast. I hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to support your journey towards better health and happiness. Remember, each health journey is unique. This podcast is not medical advice, and it's essential to consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes. If you'd like to schedule a complimentary consultation with me, I would love to talk with you. Please go to drrachelyager.com/schedule.